Well, welcome everyone. I'm so happy everyone is with us this morning. My name is Sarah Krymans and I'm an extension educator with University of Minnesota Extension. And I'm so pleased folks are here and we're going to be learning about moving in, moving out, and moving over. So if you can take just a moment and share in the chat where you are joining us from, and then share any thoughts about what concerns do you have related to rural housing availability, and that might help our presenters think about what concerns or issues folks are having in their communities, because housing is such a big issue in rural Minnesota. So go ahead and share those, and we'll be taking a peek chat. And then we do have one extra poll. Ben, I added one poll at the beginning, and Karen's going to pull that up for us. We are curious, why are you participating in today's webinar? Is it for personal use, for professional use, or both personal and professional? So Karen will pull that up and folks can indicate. There we go. Great. Lots of responses there. Give just a few more seconds so folks can respond to the poll. Karen, let's go ahead and share those results. It looks like the majority of people are here for both personal and professional, about 59%, 38% for professional use, and about 3% for personal use. So thank you. That's always just real helpful to know where people are coming from. Thank you, Karen, for pulling that poll up. This webinar is part of our No Place Like Home series. Our first webinar, Home Energy Beat the Chill, was last week. If you missed that, no worries. After we get through the entire series, we will be sending a playlist out for all of the webinars. So if you missed the one on January 18th, you will get that. So I just wanted to point out the upcoming webinars, and we're hoping that folks will take advantage of these great opportunities. With us today is Karen Mathis, and she's our Director of IT Training and Support and Extension, and she's just going to be our main troubleshooter for the day. She's going to help with any tech issues, polls, monitoring the chat. She's going to help provide links in the chat. So you can send a direct chat to Karen if you have any tech issues, and she will be able to help us out with those. Our facilitators for today are Ben Winchester and Ryan Pash, and they are both with our University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality, and they will be providing a little bit more of a biography or just a little bit of a background of who they are and where they're at. So with no additional slides from me, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Ben is going to bring up his slides.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Pleasure to be here today with you and to share all this great information we have collected for you all over the past maybe 10 years of what's happening in our rural communities, and more distinctly, what does that mean for our housing? I think all of you have some pretty deep passions here, and I'm glad we started off with the question about whether it's for personal or professional use, because typically when I give this presentation, we do it on site in a community, because relationships matter, places matter, the support networks that you've got there matter. But more importantly, typically when we have conversations about what we're going to talk about today, senior housing and housing for older people, it is deeply personal. And so really when we talk about this concept, we need to take our hats off. It's just not me as an economic developer. It's not me as an extension person. It's me because my mom is getting older and she is no longer able to stay in her home, for example. So we want to work through some of these scenarios. But so with that, just welcome here today. My name is Ben. I'm a rural sociologist. I love Minnesota. I've always loved Minnesota. I went to school at the University of Minnesota Morris. My undergrad was in math and stats. I'm a data geek. And if you've seen me before, you know I love data. And so does Ryan, which is great. So he's here today too. And really, my goal here is to help make this consumable. We've gone through a number of years of applied research projects here, and we want to make sure that the information that we provide on this educational side is consumable to y'all, so you can help make decisions locally. So with that, I'm going to kind of start our more formal presentation here. And the title of most of my work is Rewriting the Rural Narrative. And that, that is the narrative we use to describe our small towns as terrible. And a lot of times it's built out of the past, like 50, 60 years ago, things that happened. And I think more pointedly, we have some real trends that point toward opportunities and real positiveness going in our small towns. And we'll look at some of those things. So the title of this presentation here is Moving In, Moving Out, Moving Over. We're going to look at kind of the churn of housing. Who looks to move in? And then how do we start looking at this from a community level point of view? So as I mentioned, typically when we do this presentation, we're in person, and I like to start this whole engagement out when we do an in-person engagement by just doing roundtables, really. And I want people to share their thoughts on the topic of housing, with no hats, not me as an HRA person, not me as an EDA person, right? So really, we would start off with how many of you have had a personal experience with an older family member changing homes? And this would become the purpose of the 10 to 15 minute kind of conversation at the table, to get kind of a refocus, to think in terms of the personal decisions that people make in their homes. So with that, we're going to open up a poll here. And that is, have you had a personal experience with an older family member changing homes recently? This is a yes or no question. And then in chat, we're going to, just so you know, we're going to collect all this chat. I'm going to kind of weed it out a little bit for you. And we're going to make sure to get this attached to the PowerPoint. So when this is over, we're going to be providing some follow-up value to you as well. So in chat, if you get some time and you have some thoughts on this, think about this, this personal experience you had with an older family member changing homes. What did you have control over? What did you not? What were you prepared for or unprepared for? What do you wish you had planned for? So I'd like to just kind of open it up in terms of like, what were the things that surprised you really? So with this, I'm going to share this poll result here. Can we see the poll result live? Oh, wait, there we go. Perfect. So we see about 2/3, right? Folks have had a personal experience with a family member changing homes, and this is not unique. We know that we are getting older, not just in this country, but more distinctly in our rural community. So with that, we're going to move forward a little bit here. Thank you. So really kind of getting back to the narrative, which is, there's a brain drain, and that is our kids are leaving, right? We have 18-year-olds who after high school graduation leave. We talk about our rural communities as living in the middle of nowhere, and that we're a sleepy town that was woken up by the tornado, or fill in the blank with some other tragedy that occurred in our small town, right? And then you've got other kind of stereotypes out there about, how everybody knows one another, nobody locks their doors. We've got all these kind of stereotypes, but a lot of times it's fairly doom and gloomy. And really, I kind of say, like, if our small towns are dying, then why can't I find a house to buy, right? Like, does that not make any sense? Like, our housing stocks have been filled. So it's true we've gone through dramatic changes in terms of economic restructuring of the agricultural sector, the loss of manufacturing across many of our rural communities, the consolidation of school districts, the retail sector changing, the rise of big box retailers. But many of these trends are not distinctly rural. These happen in our urban communities too. So we want to talk about change, and we talk about change in our rural communities. But one of the things that we kind of hang our hat on in terms of the narrative here is total population. So, typically I'm a data guy, and when the new census comes out, everybody's like, whoa, let's see what happened to our population. So here's a map, right, of the state or of the country. And here's the counties. If you're in white, your county experienced population loss. And if you've got some gradation of orange or maroon here, that your county grew. And we tend to have this total population infatuation mentality that if we're not growing, we're dying. I call it the, you've seen Talladega Nights, that movie, like the Ricky Bobby quote, where it's if you're not winning, you're losing. This is what it's like for population dynamics. Like if we're not winning, we're losing. And that's just not the case. Even if we're stable in our population, we're called stagnant. So anyway, there's a lot of narrative kind of behind this total population. So why shouldn't we use this? I'll say, and I will caution you to stay away from total population as an indicator for your success and failure. And why is that? So let's look at this region in Western Minnesota. We have 5-county region, and their population from 1960 to 2010 went down by 35%. This is pretty much the narrative, right? Doom and gloom. Nobody wants to live there anymore. People are moving out. But look at the line right below that. In terms of occupied households, the number of occupied households in this region actually went up. So how can that be? How can the population go down by 35%, but the number of households has remained stable? In fact, it's grown a slight amount. Our households look different, is the key point. So here, This is the proportion of US household sizes from 1960 to 2017. 60% of our households had 3 or more people in them in 1960. Today, that's down to 37%. Households with 2 or fewer people, 2 or 1, right, in 1960 was 41%. Now that's up to 62%. So our households are getting smaller. In fact, we know that the average household size in this country has gone from 3.6 in 1940 to 2.6 in 2018. And really imagine, like I lived in Hancock for a long time, and there's, let's say there's a fixed number of 200 homes in Hancock. If you've got 200 homes in Hancock, right, how many people are going to live there in 1940? 3.6 times 200, which would be about 720. Today, you have an average household size of 2.6. So if you've got those same 200 homes, how many people are going to live there? 520. You are going to lose 29% of your population by doing nothing except existing in the modern world. So this is not people migrating out. This is not people just choosing to run away from our small towns. This is a function of demographic destiny. And one of the major components impacting our household size today is the larger proportion of seniors. And today we have a very common scenario where you may have 2 seniors in a home and one of them passes away and the surviving spouse stays in that home. What happens to our population then? It just went down by 1, but your occupied households stayed the same, right? So we still have a full housing stock. So yes, there is outmigration, but demographics work against growth, and sometimes they even work against stability, or i.e. the negative narrative is stagnation, right? So again, when we look at some of these population changes across Minnesota, here's the narrative, right? Here's the population change, loser, loser, loser. We got a bunch of loser counties because they lost their population, right? But when you look at the housing stocks, we've got pretty stable housing supplies. Do not hang your hat on population change as an indicator for your success or failure. So I would really like to have you shift your measure of success from population to houses. Is our housing stock filled? Are our homes in good shape? Because for me, housing stocks are a measure of community wealth. They're home to individual wealth while someone resides there, and they also persist over time. Now, my big disclaimer here, I'm not a housing expert. I conduct community-based research based on what communities basically are like. I want to know more about this. So we're going to kind of walk through that. I want to know more about blank. But really, this is a 10,000-foot view with local implications and really has an implication for local leadership. So if you do not know, we've done a tremendous amount of work around what we call the brain gain in rural Minnesota and across this country. We've done studies on people moving in, and they tend to be focused in very specific age ranges. The 30 to 49 is where people are the key demographic. And but really, we found this across the country. We found it in Nebraska in 2012. Montana replicated the survey just in the past year into the pandemic. And we've done studies in 2004, 2009, 2012, and the latest study we did on workforce movers happened in 2019, right before the pandemic. And when we asked people, why do they make the move into small towns and rural places, that it was pretty clear: a simpler pace of life, like access to recreation, a slower pace of life, less commute, right? Number 2 is safety and security, especially high with people with children. And the third top reason is the low cost of housing. So got a lot of really good reasons that people have been moving in, and we publish on this and we research this. And I'd like to remind you that this brain gain trend has been happening since the 70s. This is not new. And essentially, we filled up our housing stocks in the 70s and especially the 90s with people migrating in. Our rural communities are not one-way streets where everybody wants to get out. In fact, you do have a group that wants to get out. They're called high school graduates. You got 40 to 60% of your high school graduates want to leave. And that's termed the brain drain. Well, I just want to kind of counter that negative language by saying on one hand, you'll lose your high school kid. But on the other hand, you're going to be bringing in people in their 30s and 40s, sometimes with kids, education, job skills, you name it. So who are these people? Not everybody's moving for a job. In fact, just a third of people move because they have a job or a job offer. They look for all of these non-job related factors on the move in. Second piece I really want to highlight here is just 25% in the Minnesota survey, 34% Montana, had lived in the community before. I think we tend to think in terms of returnees. That is, kids that grew up here, they moved away and they're going to come back. Well, you know what? That's just 1 in 4 of the new people moving into our rural communities. And this one data point here is like a lifetime worth of work because it begs the question of what is the newcomer experience? How welcoming are our rural communities? We found out that 78% of newcomers said their community was welcoming. But we know for those that said the community was not welcoming, less than half say they plan to be there in 5 years. So now recruitment returns into a retention issue. at the same time. So we do know that these people have been moving in. We are actually not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on the brain gain, but we do know that there's a demand for rural living. And this is not new. This did not start with the pandemic. Here's a study from 2009 from the Pew Research Institute that asked Americans, like, all right, Americans, you know, we know that 80% of you live in the city and 20% of you live in small towns and rural places. But if you could live wherever you wanted, where would you live? 51% of Americans said they would prefer to live in small towns and rural places. So there is actually a demand for rural living. And as you probably have realized, the pandemic exacerbated that. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, we could repopulate rural America. Like, we don't need saving, folks. We've already saved ourselves. Our homes are full, right? What does that really look like now? So we started to see these workforce housing shortages since 2005. You know, we've had a lot of companies complain that we can't find homes for the workers that they want to bring in. But again, like, why can't we find housing for the workers? It's not because we're dying. It's because we're not. So then I would say, we need more housing. Let's just build new. That's the end of story. We're done. This presentation is over. Right? But we know that building new is rarely a viable option. In fact, building new happens generally where there's income, not because there's interest or desire. So as we move forward, we want to look at some of the first kind of glimpses into some of the changes that we're going to see across our rural communities. And so I want you all to prepare for one of the largest demographic changes that ever happened to rural America since 1930. And I'll tell you that, once you get done seeing this data on the next few slides, you can't say you don't see this coming. We do know that we're getting older, right? The grain of rural, a higher percentage of seniors. The number of people in this country is not going to get smaller anytime soon. We're still kind of getting bigger, especially with the baby boomers just moving into full retirement. So what's coming now? Who is in our homes now? So we first did this data analysis in 2010. So you'll see these charts here that start in 2010, and then we're going to look at the trends since then. And so really, what did we have? This was really the first chart I made, which was the percent of owner-occupied homes, and this was 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, 2010, percent of owner-occupied homes that were owned by people over the age of 65. And then across the prairie, right, almost over 35% of homes are owned by people over 65. And I initially saw this, was like, holy cow, I had no idea. I mean, I really didn't know that this was such a high percentage. So then I wanted to look at the baby boomers too. And the baby boomers are really such a large category that I split them into two. In the leading boomers, the older, and the trailing boomers, the younger. So when we look at those proportions too across here, we see we're getting a good 20% are leading boomers and another 20% are trailing boomers. And when we put this together and we look at the percentage of owner-occupied homes, and I only am looking at owner-occupied homes here because we're in Minnesota, we tend to have an 80 to 90% home ownership rate. Those numbers tend to be much higher in our rural communities, especially. So this implication is having a real effect here. So when you break apart the counties in Minnesota between the urban counties like Hennepin and Ramsey and the most rural counties like Rock County, you see that the percentage of homeowners that are baby boomers, trailing or leading, really isn't all that different. They're really, what's that, 46%, 45%, doesn't vary by your urban or rural status. But as you become more urban, if your county is more rural, you have a higher percentage of people over the age of 65. This is the key marker for our rural communities and tells us that any of these trends related to senior housing and senior moves following retirement are going to happen in our rural communities first. 78% of our homeowners in our most rural communities are over the age of 65 in 2010. These numbers do not look dramatically different today. And why is that? Houston County. There may be somebody on the call here from Houston County. This is where my aunt and uncle live in southeastern Minnesota. And when we look at the composition of homeowners and renters in this county by age in the year 2000, what's circled here are the baby boomers. Right? So it's a pretty big bump. I mean, you know this. You always see that like demographic snake with a big bump in the middle that are the baby boomers, right? And here's the senior population above that. So here's the boomers in 2000, and these bumps kind of moved over, right? Because they got 10 years older 10 years later. Right now, these bumps, right now, these bumps are right here, and they continue to move over. And when we look at the distribution of owner-occupied homes in Houston County, 28% of homes are owned by people over the age of 65, and another 46% are baby boomers. So what is that? 74% of homes are owned by baby boomers or older. These homes are going to turn over in the next 20 years. This is almost unprecedented in terms of residential turnover in our communities. So what, how welcoming are we? What kind of condition are our homes in? Like, this just begs all these questions when we first did this analysis. So in many ways, I would get asked, like, isn't there a workforce housing shortage? And I would say, nah, there's plenty of workforce housing. It's currently occupied by our seniors. But that was 10 years ago. So where is the supply? What's happened to this supply? Here's my answer. I believe, and this data supports, that the historical home ownership rates for the current senior generation, this current senior generation stays in their homes at a rate well above previous generations. So typically, once people retired, they would start not becoming homeowners. They may move somewhere else and do a different type of housing, right? They would move out of that home ownership level. Well, when people move out of home ownership, it opens up their homes into that supply, right? These are homes that are now lost supply for Americans because the seniors are staying in their homes longer than any previous generation ever did. What are the implications for this? Will home ownership continue? We look at the differentials of the home ownership rates of people over 65 and those younger people, and we know it's taking a hit. Younger people not only do not have a housing market to buy into, they can't afford it. They watch their parents go underwater, and why they're hedging that risk. I mean, we've got a lot of implications for home ownership, but we need to decide whether we still value home ownership. This becomes a real pertinent community level question. But we do know that we're seeing like different types of households too, right? Who do Americans 26-year-olds live with? In 1968, the top person you lived with was your spouse, 78%. 2018, 26-year-olds live with their parent is the top level at 30%, not with their spouse. We've dropped 50 points there. Also, we are starting to move into more of these multi-generational households where grandparents are bringing in their grandkids, or you're having your mom live with you, right? And your family. And I say it's a return to multi-generational housing because it used to be this way. I would argue that the ideal toward a nuclear household, which is I'm going to live in my house with my wife and my 2 kids, and that is going to be our measure of success, is so 1950s and 60s and 70s. And that really, if you look back in the early 1900s, multi-generational housing was the way it was. It was the way life was. And now we are starting to see a return to multi-generational housing as well. But we need to make sure we have zoning in place to allow that. I mean, multifamily too. So there's all of these kind of characteristics that are impacting what our houses look like and who's living within them. So what's coming? Like, is this a disaster? Is this an opportunity? So let's look at some interrelated trends here. So we do know that retirees and seniors do move out. They're providing supplies. And, when we asked, the Trans-American Center asked retirees, like, of those that moved, about 61% said they plan to stay, said they stayed in the same home, and 39% moved into a new home after retirement. Why did they move? They wanted to downsize, reduce expenses, move closer to family and friends, move into an age-friendly home. Like, there are a lot of good reasons why people do make a move. But what about that 61%, right? That stay. Some people, and we'll look at that in just a minute, but some people are drawn to new places, right? You can't control, like, people moving out and wanting to live closer to their grandkids. Like, you're not going to keep them in town, basically. But when they leave, they're opening up housing supply too. And then as people age, we start to look at continuum of care, right? And our smallest towns are not able to provide those continuum of care services as you progress up that continuum. So people are going to end up moving out in that age range as well. So, but really, I like to talk about, like, before the continuum of care, there's a continuum of life. You don't go from retirement to the senior facility. I mean, there's a whole dynamic here that I think gets missed in this conversation. But we end up with intentions, and I want to talk about our intentions. So when we asked, the Retirement Confidence Survey asked folks, like, when do you expect to retire? Right? 9% of people said they expected to retire under the age of 60, but in reality, 40% of people are retiring under the age of 60. When people were asked, when do you plan to retire? 38% said, I'm not going to retire till I'm over 70, but only 4% of people actually made it that far. So there's a large differential here between what people intend to do and what you actually do. And I would argue that our housing policy right now is a policy of best intentions. And that is, I'm going to live in my house forever. That's not really a policy, by the way. I'm just making that up, right? But it is a way that people think about wanting to stay in their home. So why do seniors stay in their home? 90% of seniors intend to stay in their homes. And these are seniors. The other one had a different age range. The other chart earlier had a different age range. This one is an AARP survey. Only 43% of those over the age of 70 found it easy to actually live independently. And then why don't people move? Stress of moving, fear of losing independence, anxiety, emotional ties, fear of the unknown, right? And it makes sense. So we're going to open up another poll here for you. So for those of you that did maybe experience a move there, how did that move go for y'all? Was it super? Did it go okay? Or did it not go well at all? We hear stories all over the place. We're not expecting to have it go in different ways, but I think it would be interesting to cross tab these results here by did you plan for it? Because I think a lot of times the move ends up being unexpected. So with that, we're going to open up that poll question here and share your thoughts in chat. Like, were there any public or private resources you used during the process of the move or that you wish there were available? Because I think there are a lot of support services out there to help seniors stay in their homes, or, and then what type of web of services are there to help seniors move over is the bigger question. So we're going to keep that poll open here for just a second. So we do have a concept called aging in place. I know many of you have heard of this, but I would argue that the aging in place is confounding two different issues. Some people say that they want to age in place and they mean age in town. I want to live in Hancock. And some people say I want to age in place, meaning I want to live in my house. It actually means different things in almost all these conversations I've had with seniors about their intentions. And some people, and most times it just means aging in your current home, right? It can be cheaper. There's actually a lot of incentives, like millions of dollars in incentives to keep people in their home, to actually rehabilitate the home. And really people can stay in there when telemedicine can work for some people, right? But we know as people age, you become disabled, right? And ambulatory difficulty is one of the bigger ones I see here right off the bat. Aside from any disability, almost half of people have some form of disability by the time they hit age of 75. And the bigger one is ambulatory. It's difficulty walking up and down stairs. And so we end up in this different scenario where seniors may not want to have a conversation about their inability to stay in their home. And it might be like, I'm talking to my mom and be like, hey, mom, I just don't think you can stay in this house. You can barely get up and down the steps, And she's like, leave me alone. I'm going to live in my house, right? This is my house. I'm going to live here forever. And then she goes to the doctor in the afternoon and tells the doctor, like, I'm really not getting around very well. I don't know how this is really going to work out. Like, why didn't you have this conversation with your son in the morning, but you could tell this not strange, but your doctor in the afternoon? So I think there are a lot of conversations that could be had that are not occurring right now. So with that, we got some poll results. I'm going to share the results here. So we see some people did have a super time, but overall, it seems to be okay. It's like we kind of relate it to your shopping list when you're buying a new house. You have like, I want these 12 things. Same thing with this move. Like you want these 12 things and you got 7 of them. How did that move go becomes a more than pertinent issue. And so really what happens when you age in the home long-term? Kelly Ash is with the Center for Rural Policy and Development. And if you don't know his work, he did probably the best summary of all the research I've done here in this paper called Workforce Housing Shortage. Like Kelly is an awesome writer, and I am not a good writer, but he really hit the nail on the head here that the relative higher percentage of seniors living in rural communities, which combined with their tendency to want to age in place, the emphasis on helping them to do so, and the lack of assisted living facilities in rural communities is causing not only a bottleneck in houses coming on the market, but increasing the likelihood that the number of dilapidated housing units will increase in the future. We can be putting ourselves at risk fairly seriously here. So what is the public cost of private inaction, right? What do I mean by that? I mean, so I had lived in Hancock. I'm going to stop this for a second. I lived in Hancock, Minnesota, and my neighbor, Howard, who passed away now, but when I moved in, he was probably 80 years old or 82 when I had moved in. And when he moved in, his house, our homes were both built in the same year, 1907. But looking at them from the outside, you could not tell because his was dilapidated. He was on a fixed income. There was no way he was keeping his place up. All the lath and plaster was all running with water. The chimney was leaking. Like it was in terrible shape. And when he passed away, if it weren't for his daughter just moving right into the house, that home would have been torn down. And so, right, and it's just one thing on, we typically have this kind of laissez-faire approach to housing. Like, I'm not going to tell Howard what to do with his house. That's his private asset, right? So, but really, can we view this as a public good? So I want to make the argument. I want to just show you why a private private inaction can have a public cost. So let's look at what this looks like. I'm going to get back to sharing here. So imagine in your community, you have just 4 homes. I know this doesn't make any sense, but this is the example. You have 4 homes in town. And then one year, this home becomes dilapidated and you had to tear it down, right? And the way homes get assessed, or the way properties get assessed, is you get assessed on the land and the structure, right? Well, if you tear down the house, there's no structure to be assessed on. So your property taxes are going to be reduced by like 70 to 80%. So now this next year, when, for example, Howard's house is torn down, he is only going to be assessed at a property tax level of $200. That's what he's going to have to pay. Well, now, right, that parcel just lost $800 in revenue for the county. Does the county reduce its levy then because Howard's house got torn down? No. Who's paying for that $800 reduction? Everybody else's bill just went up because of that one property becoming razed to the ground. So now there is a public interest in these private decisions, I would argue, that are being made in our rural communities. And in many times, equity in our houses is one of the greatest and only pieces of net worth that our seniors have, especially in this oldest population. So rather than having a conversation about buying a new house and taking on a new mortgage, it's about shifting equity, right? How can we shift our equity into a new structure? So we could be offering move over housing. And we do this. We've seen this happen in Otter Tail County, the small town of Otter Tail in Otter Tail County. They had a developer there that kind of was recognizing this trend, and he put up these single floor, patio homes, 2 2-bedroom ones and 2 1-bedroom ones. It was just 4 units, and they sold like the moment he broke ground. And he's like, well, I put up another one then, and they sold the moment he broke ground. So when seniors move, this opens up their house for the supply. And then, but again, as I mentioned earlier, these inhibiting factors are stress and fear. But you know what's even worse is stress and fear in emergency situations. Because if you live in the world of best intentions, right? I'm going to update my house. And we hear this. I'm going to update my house. I'm going to put in a handicap ramp into the house, and I'm going to update my bathroom with all the handicap accessibility. I expanded the doorway and redid the tub, and I spent like $12,000, we hear people say. And then literally 9 months later, something happens and they're unable to stay in their house. And what happens then? The real estate agent starts to engage the family and say, well, let's start to sell your mom's house. And then you start looking through it and you're like, well, it's got knob and tube wiring and you can't really get insurance for knob and tubes. You're going to have to update the electrical. And at the same time, you've got peeling paint on this house and there's no first-time home buyer eligibility if you've got any peeling paint. So, it's probably going to cost you like $15,000 to get this updated. And then she's like, well, I just spent $10,000 updating my bathroom and putting on the ramp. Like, that's a livability expense. That is not an equity builder. So this is the real conversation I would advocate for us to think about in terms of how much we dedicate in asset building to keeping people in our homes, as opposed to building homes that may be appropriate for that lifestyle. And we will look at some of that too. So now, I'm usually like a super positive guy when it comes to small towns and rural places, but maybe, just maybe, we need to lift up the stories of disaster, where best intentions go wrong. Like, here's where my mom did not make it work. And we hear this, like people, when they have to move in emergency situations, like I would have preferred to stay in Hancock, but there was nothing open here and nothing open in Starbuck. And I ended up going to Alexandria. These are the types of outcomes that you end up with when we don't plan. This is the policy of best intentions around housing. So example, just as a simple example, our patio homes, they're manageable, senior-friendly floor plans, provide landscaping services when they want to go visit the kids for 2 weeks at a time, and minimize upkeep for residents. So a lot of times when I would present on this data up front, the economic developers would be like, I don't know, seniors, they're out of the workforce. They don't really, they're not part under my purview, right? So I want to make the economic case why we should care about these seniors and why we should care about them moving over. Because if our seniors move out, because there is no appropriate housing in our community, they're going to take with them their transfer receipts. Transfer receipts and retirement dollars make up a large proportion of income in all rural communities. So here, this is Big Stone County, Western Minnesota, around the bump there. We look at the components of income in this county. Less than half of all the wages earned by people in Big Stone County come from a job. Half of income comes from wages, i.e. a job. 28% of income in the county comes from a transfer receipt. And transfer receipts are old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, right? This doesn't include 401ks, Roth IRAs. That number, this percentage is probably higher because this doesn't include the private retirement accounts. But really, when you look at this characteristic, like imagine, like seniors are earning retirement dollars. They're spending all their retirement dollars. You don't put money away for retirement. You're retired. You're spending almost everything locally. What else are you doing? You've got transfer receipts coming in, paying for Medicare and Medicaid. Imagine how many jobs you have today because of these line items right here. So if you are ready to lose $1 in $4, don't provide any move over housing for your seniors, and they will take their transfer receipts to another community that may have it. So if we are looking to truly invest in the housing stocks of our future, we need to actually make this kind of connection on the churn. We can't just say we need 20 new houses and not care who's going to live in them or what type, or call it workforce housing as a generic term. It actually has to mean something. It has to mean like big single family home or condominiums or multifamily housing units or whatever. So part of this is trying to turn the attention of our economic developers to see seniors, even though they're not in the productive workforce right now, they were, and they're still earning their paychecks, i.e. retirement, and spending those dollars locally. So if we do not have our eyes on the broader housing prize of senior housing, we are going to lose these people. So I'm going to make you this offer today. It's a little special offer here thing. That if you would like this profile of components of income for your county, please shoot me an email, or maybe, I don't know if there's some ways there a commentary on the email. I should have checked this out before. I kind of did this morning, like, oh, these are super easy to make for y'all. So if you are, or shoot me an email. I prefer to actually do it in some feedback mechanism via the evaluation, if that's possible. But if you're unable to do that, shoot me an email. Let me know what county you're looking for the data for, and I can happily get that for you. So with that, we are only going to be integrated with a greater senior service economy. We're only going to be integrated with more baby boomer and senior related services, health services, employment services. So we should want to retain these transfer receipts. That's my opinion, is we should try to keep these dollars, these 1 in 4 income dollars coming into our rural communities. So maybe move over housing is the real opportunity. The current home may be the only equity of these folks. So really for me, housing is the key. We build supply and workforce housing by making the existing housing stock available. And again, a house is not just a private asset, but it's also a community asset that we hope persists over time. So now the pandemic has been like, wow, everybody wants to move rural. And then they look at rural like, there's no homes for sale. Like, in which, as you probably know, totally exacerbated the price issues with housing in our rural communities. So it's like, whoa, what do you mean there's no housing? I thought rural was dying. We should have plenty of homes all over the place. We don't. Again, we're very much filled up in rural communities. There's some other interrelated trends I want you to pay attention to, and that is Zillow, it's Airbnb, it's institutional buyers. You need to have a real conversation, I would argue, at the local level about what value do you place on local home ownership, because I will tell you that the trends are against it. The trends are toward renters. The trends are toward Zillow, toward institutional buyers. And in fact, we know during the pandemic, there was an article in one of the Minnesota newspapers here in the fall of the pandemic, and that had said that home sales in Western Minnesota, this kind of this four county area, the home sales were down like 3.5% right in the heyday of the pandemic home sale boom. And I was like, no way is that right. So we called the assessors together and we're like, hey, what's going on with your home sale data? It looks like you're down. And all the assessors were saying, no, we're not down. Our home sales are way up. Well, then you go to the data source. What was the source of the article that said the home sales were down? It was the multiple listing services. And what that does, it only provides identification of properties that get listed. What we found is anywhere between 40 to 60% of home sales during the pandemic were not arm's length transactions. And that means you have two like strangers, like I sold my house in Hancock to some stranger. I didn't know them, right? 40 to 60% today are not arm's length. It's like to family members. It's the people you know. It's like, hey, Sarah, I know your mom wants to sell her house. I'm going to take her out for lunch and we're just going to work it out. It never hits the market. 40 to 60%. So kind of these social networks are beginning to matter more. If you want, and we kind of say this, like, If you want to find a house to buy in rural Minnesota, visit with the seniors after church. That is the #1 place to have people's inklings around potential movement and to engage that conversation. So at what point do you change things, right? Do you do it with vacant property or new property? Or what about properties entering the market? Do you work with buyers or sellers? Like, how do we ensure our homes are in good shape for the next generation? We need to engage people. We need to actually begin discussions about the intentions of those people in the house, the conditions on the inside and outside of that house, so there are no surprises. But we know an inhibiting factor is people saying, yeah, I know we kind of finangled that outlet in the basement a while ago. I don't want anybody in there like shutting down our house because we redid our electrical and it wasn't totally up to code or whatever. So, and things get broke or like the toilet doesn't work. And there's a fear when people come into your home that they're actually going to kind of tell you can't live here anymore. So I would argue we need a way to help people assess their homes in a respectful way to help ensure that our housing stock will have a transition in the future. I really want us to start a discussion about housing succession. We talk about business succession. We talk about succession in a lot of different avenues, and you all are probably in this series. Again, I'm not a housing person. I don't know anything about housing. Many of you on this webinar probably are and have some solutions for this, but I just have these data points that tell me all these things about the trends inhibiting that kind of growth. And I know that agencies, there's no one agency responsible for all the housing in the community. Agencies work with low income or Section 8 or certain types of housing or certain grant programs, right? There's buckets that we work in within the community. So really, I want to appeal to a sense of continuity for families and the community in general, because we've talked to many seniors when we say like, hey, have you ever thought about selling your house? And they're like, no, nobody wants to buy that. Our small town's dying. Like we have people like lined up waiting to buy your house, right? What kind of shape is that house in? Now, one of the final things I want to talk about here is this, that a lot of times we need to talk about the house, the house, not the home, i.e. when a person is in it. So for example, you may have a house that needs weatherization, and the person or the family that's in there now may be low income and eligible for a state weatherization program, but the person that would move in next year is not. So from a community level, we want to have that home updated, because essentially you're helping to reduce the expenses of the next generation on that house if we're eligible to take on some of these things. So with that, maybe one of the best things you can do for the future of your community is to ensure there is somewhere for people to live. And I just think this is the most valuable point I've got in terms of how to understand what this really means, because it still starts with people. It still starts with conversations. It still starts with us actually like caring about the capacity of our people to make decisions themselves, and then give them the support they need to do that. We're not the experts all the time. We help people make decisions. This is what I love about Extension. So this is really all I've got. Hopefully this was valuable. But I'll tell you, this is the result of like 8 years worth of, I presented the first data and community saying, well, what about this? And what about that? So we want more what about this and what about that questions from you too. But with that, I kind of want to turn this over to Ryan Pesch. And he's going to tell us a little bit about Battle Lake, Minnesota, and some of the things that they've been going through there. So Ryan, welcome.
Hello. So I'm keeping this short and sweet. I'm not as sweeping across decades in time and geography as Ben has. It's taken us to this point. I'm an extension educator in West Central Minnesota. I'm in Otter Tail County. Ben is talking a little bit about Otter Tail County. And I have done some work in individual communities, really at that community level, which is often where we're at as community vitality educators, with numerous communities trying to sort this out, right? So at the community level, each community has different assets, right? Each community is in different places. But I would agree, certainly with Ben's assessment, that the sea change that we're going to see is definite in terms of baby boomers and those older transitioning and moving is certainly something I've seen in, say, the last 4 projects I've done over the last couple of years in my region, where we've done some very intense housing surveys and studies. And so my example here is Battle Lake. So if you want to bring that up, Ben, we'll go back to Battle Lake. So for Battle Lake, I'm here in Lakes Country. bit of a tourist town, but certainly small town Minnesota, right? Population 750, thereabouts. And as a community, they clearly knew that housing was a real issue, right? As we hear across all of our communities. One way that they were approaching this is to kind of just get a better sense of the pulse of their community with more intensive written survey. And I did that. We had about 400 respondents for 31% response rate, which is a good response rate when we're doing sort of a wide survey that was both in the city of Battle Lake itself, which is small, as well as essentially kind of their housing, their really was their school district. Let's think of it as their trade area. So if we go to the next one, and what we learned really mirrors a lot of what Ben was already talking about. One, we asked about what's really attractive about living in this area and living in Battle Lake. And it really mirrors what we've heard and Ben's heard in his research regarding rural Minnesota. Was it small town atmosphere? There it is, right on the right, followed quickly by welcoming community. Again, nobody's talking about their job, nobody's talking about industry, these kinds of things that we often hear about in a lot of my work in economic development. It's some of these softer things that really come across as like, these are important. And then we have a mix of other things that aren't as pronounced: public schools, proximity to work, right? Beautiful landscape. There's a whole mix of other, right? When you do a written survey, the other category can be very interesting sometimes. But we'll move on. Next slide. And so what we did is try to get a sense of like, who is moving, and what does this look like for this area, this little corner of the state, and what that meant for the decision makers in Battle Lake, their HRA and their EDA. What kind of tailored data can we give them to help them understand what their future looks like? And so if we just looked at this part about owning, right, or moving, who's moving, right? 5% moving in the next year, 18% in the next 5, and fully a third moving in the next decade. Now, again, like Ben has talked about, that move isn't necessarily going to be like, I'm moving to Washington State. It's just a move. I can move from my house in town and stay in town. I can move from my house outside of town in the school district on a lake, and I'm actually moving in town. There's actually interest in that, which was an interesting finding for the people of Battle Lake. Because for a lot of small towns in Lakes country, there's always this rift between the Lakes people, the town people, right? I'm here by Pelican Rapids. It's very much true here. And so there was those interested in moving, they're now on a lake or on a farm. They're in this district. They're in the area, the pretty area. Fully a third that were like, yeah, actually, I would move into the city of Battle Lake. For them, that was an interesting finding, kind of a detailed finding that was interesting. And the last one on that, Ben, on that last slide, is this point about when we look at those over the age of 65, in terms of the distribution of those who are saying, yes, I'm moving, 2/3 are in this over 65 category. So if we go to the next, so it's our boomers and our older boomers. We asked about housing preferences. Again, of those that are looking to sell and are interested in moving in Battle Lake, at average age was 62. It's the same category, the same cohort we were talking about, that Ben was talking about. You know, aging baby boomers looking to transition is really a large part of it, and they're looking to downsize. So again, if we can get a kind of a clear data set about what your current number of bedrooms, what's your ideal future number of bedrooms, this is good data that is very useful to developers, real estate people, as well as the people in public kind of official capacity at HRA or EDA. So we go next. The other part of what's interesting when we look at it, and we ask people what's their motivating factors in their next purchase. I guess this is just, maybe this just underlines what we all know about real estate. It's all about location, right? And again, that location can be like, I really want this really sweet pad or something downtown that looks cool or something, but it also means the community, right? So that location part certainly meant different things to different people. But in another part of the data set is very clear that there's a very strong affinity to remaining in that Battle Lake community, right? So that what comes across when we look at the number of questions is that there's a certain community tie, and that importance of staying in that community was important to those movers. So we go to the next, Ben. I think this might wrap us up. And looking at, again, that type of housing. Clearly, it's sort of in keeping with what we saw for those folks that are looking to downsize as they age. So we see single level here jumping up as the most popular item. So this really kind of says, what is the flavor of that moving over housing stock that Ben was talking about? So folks are moving over. What does that look like? Well, at least the folks in Battle Lake, and this was true in all the other ones I did, is like, actually single level sounds good, right? And it makes sense when we're looking at what we've got with the data set as a whole, that we're aging, we're looking to downsize. Hey, that's the type of housing stock I'm looking at. So in terms of the next steps that we saw in Battle Lake, again, what does Battle Lake do? Where does Battle Lake go? Having done this research, they really talked about moving over housing stock, right? And they also talked about just a different mix of housing stock as well. So in the past year, they've launched 2 new developments, in part based on some of this research. One, this is just like a headline there, that Blue Spruce Properties, they're breaking ground on definitely like Ben was talking about, patio housing, 6 duplexes as a greenfield redevelopment, but also knowing the types of folks that are looking to relocate into the city. You also see, this snazzy redevelopment in their downtown core of the Hatchery, which is another 15 apartment units. So again, trying to have a mix for a community. What is that mix of housing that we're able to provide, even in a very small community with less than about 800 now? So it makes me think, if we want to kind of transition to conversation at this point, Ben and Sarah, is like, we could put this in chat, or maybe we're in transition to discussion. What types of strategies are your communities employing? Certainly a lot of you are in really the housing work or working with seniors in your professional role. And I'm sure you see your community or your own agency employing different strategies to try to understand, like what Ben and I are talking about as community people, how do we have that continuity of people in the community and have the community housing remain strong? What are those public actions that need to happen? And what are some of those personal actions that need to happen that Ben was talking about in terms of how do we engage people well in order to continue this? So.
Thank you, Ryan and Ben. Oh my gosh, such great information. I can't wait till we're able to share. I'm assuming we're going to be able to send out a PDF of the PowerPoint slides, and people are going to want to look at those. Yep, Ben's giving me a thumbs up there. People are going to want to look at those because there was so much information being shared. We have some great time here for conversation and discussion. And Ryan, you posed the question, what types of strategies are communities employing? And people can share that in the chat. We could also have, I always hesitate a little bit, we could have people unmute themselves if they'd like to share as well. Karen's shaking her head. Yeah, she'll help us manage that technology. So go ahead and share in the chat or respond. And while we are waiting for, yes.
Well, I just say, I'm just looking at the chat. I mean, Kelsey here's talking about one roof housing. So I don't know, maybe that means something to you. I'm kind of dumb on that. Maybe Kelsey wants to explain a little more. Certainly we hear a lot about zoning changes. Again, I'm working a lot with EDAs and business development organizations and such. That's often something that people feel like they can change when it comes to their communities.
Ryan, that is
deal with what
that is an organization, and I can let Kelsey explain more about what the organization is.
Well, I definitely can't fully explain what the organization is, but I can say what it has done in Cook County. In Cook County, that they build homes that are on land trusts that have prevention of what you can resell the property for, but they also have loans built in if, say, your furnace goes out. So what it has allowed people to do in some cases is buy homes that maybe are lower expensive than they would be usually buying that same house for if they had to also buy the land the same way. And it does potentially help with continuing having those properties at a lower resale rate if somebody does retire or move out or needs a change. So in our community, it has made some impact, but I think I heard a study at one point that like 25 homes a year needed to be built for just the people that lived in the area for everybody to be housed the way they wanted to. And I think that was many years ago. And that isn't, we can't keep up with that with just the population currently. The new houses that are coming into our area are new residents mostly, or changes to the population. So it has been a good service, and I would encourage those, if you're interested in communities, to look at it. I think there's been a fair share of debate in our area what affordable housing means when you say that word. And for some, that has been an affordable choice, and for some, that is not what they think of when they mean affordable housing. And then they also worked on creating an apartment complex too.
Gotcha. Thanks, guys. I didn't realize that as an organization. See, it's, but per your point, you're in Cook County. I'm in Otter Tail County. I think this is something that's part of the conversation in these very Minnesota Lakesy kind of communities. For example, going back to our Battle Lake, affordability means different things to different people, right? It was very clear in the data, what I got. There were a couple of people like, I'm currently a renter. It's a household with 3 kids, single mom. You could just see it in the data. She's like, we need affordable housing in Battle Lake. Well, yeah. And then I get another one that's like, guy on lake, we need affordable lake housing. And he also wants a shed. Okay, so it's sort of like, wait, I mean, it's like there's 2 different conversations obviously going on, and different dreams and intentions. So it's very interesting when you look at some of this data to see kind of what people's view of affordability means, what affordability means to them.
I have to share, I had a conversation with my mom recently, and we were, she's doing some storytelling from years ago, and she shared that several aunts and uncles moved to North Dakota because there was very low cost or free land available for farming. And so Nicole, you said that in the city where you live, they're promoting free land if you build a home on it. I'm curious what community you're living in, and I'm assuming there's guidelines on you have to be there for 10 or years or something. I don't know. If you want to unmute yourself, Nicole, it would be great to learn more about that free land.
Yes, yeah, they promote if they have, the city owns some properties, and if you are wanting to build, they will basically give you that land, but you have, yes, I suppose certain guidelines that you have to follow. But yeah, they just need to get more people in there. So they are choosing, as long as you build a home and you live in there, that land is yours.
This is Ben. I'll jump in here. Art Nash and I did this study a number of years ago down in northwestern Minnesota, where we canvassed, I don't know, 100 some odd towns up there. And I think it was like 70% of them had lots that they were ready to give away. And then we found a majority of the lots end up giving away, go to locals. So that just buy a different, it's like, I'm going to sell my house on Main Street and move over to 9th Street and I'll build my house over there. So we found that type of residential incentive didn't matter when everybody offers it. It really wasn't an advantage anymore. And really, the one thing we've seen now is in many communities that offer this, they may have income limits. Well, if you've got an income limit of $75,000, but you need to build a new house on that, we had $295,000. I mean, just the math never works out for some of these circumstances where the communities are trying to incentivize things, but don't actually like think it through in terms of like who is that really going to work? So I think when everybody does it, it doesn't become a leg up anymore. And I think that's been very common. But we know that, the stagnation of wages and the more cost burden homes that we've got in the state, it's only becoming exacerbated by the pandemic now, where initially I thought it was going to get better before the pandemic when we would get more homes, on the market. But now the pandemic has really exacerbated this long-term trend. And I'll say that I think, we're kind of going down the path of Great Britain, which is, it used to be they're landlocked, their population grew, right? And they used to be that the poor people lived in the country and the rich people lived in the city. And now it's exactly the opposite. And when you look at many of our rural communities today, who can afford to buy an open country property? In Swift County, we got an R40, you have to buy a minimum of 40 acres. And that's not even including the home you want to put on it. So, what is the future of our rural landscape truly going to look like? And the trends that I'm seeing are not entirely positive. We actually need to intervene ourselves on these trends at the community level. We've shown we can do this before. Well, we can do it again. Thanks.
Wonderful. Other thoughts, things that folks want to share that their communities are trying? I definitely think the affordable piece is huge, right? That's really challenging. And I don't know if Ben and Ryan, you have anything to share. We talk at times about livable wages, and are we able to do that in Minnesota? My coworker Lori Hendrickson is on the webinar as well, and there's a report about what kind of wages do people need to make rent, let alone home ownership. But Ben, Ryan, anyone thoughts about the affordability issue?
Yeah, I think it's actually getting better right up until the pandemic, because in a tight labor market, labor's got power and the wages were increasing. They had been increasing across rural Minnesota for easily 6-7 years now, to the point we were seeing, when home values are fairly, rural home values would go up by 1.2% every year, not the 5% in the metro necessarily. So you get your kind of crawl up, but wages had been upping too. So I was actually seeing fewer cost burden households starting to weed out just in the 2 or 3 years right before the pandemic. And now it's off the rails again. So it really is. I was super hopeful actually right before the pandemic on the progress we were making on the wage side to help make up for the cost burden side on the housing. But I don't know if Lori, you're seeing that too. It just has been very paramount. Thanks.
Yeah, and just something more recently, I've been part of a Facebook group in Hibbing, where I live, that is looking at the condition of the rental housing available in the city. And I really think this presentation would be something that I would like to share with them, with the city council, particularly because the group has sent a letter to the city council asking for there to be some commission around housing standards. And, very often what I see happening in rural areas, small towns, is that there are landlords, property managers that are not in the city, in the vicinity. And so what happens is that there are problems with the housing stock. They are not taken care of and not responded to like they should be. And I just really feel like, part of our affordability issue also comes with the quality. And in particular, this group is looking at things like, if we are transitioning and looking for, people with jobs to come into the community, we need to have affordable and safe quality housing for people to move into the city. And so I just feel like there's kind of not even a continuum, but it's all a part of the same discussion of what needs to be done in our rural communities.
I'll chime in a little bit of an observation for some work we did in Pope County. So Pope County is where Glenwood is, if people can place Glenwood. So there we did a workforce housing study that was specifically with employees. So I personally think maybe too often sometimes in this discussion, especially in the world of economic development, we go directly to the employers. It's not like they're, they obviously ought to have an opinion, But oftentimes you get kind of like, oh, this is an issue, you know, like there's not enough housing here. We got all these employees, they have nowhere to live. And it's a very kind of simple argument. And so they were like, well, let's actually ask your employees as opposed to just asking you, which seemed like it seemed really like a really good thing to do. I still recommend it because the perceptions of the employer can be very different. It often make gloss over. They know it's an issue, but it doesn't get into the details oftentimes that you really need to at the community level. But the one issue that we ran into there when we had done some focus groups after the surveys, especially with some builders, was like the incentives, especially in that particular market, did not line up for new affordable housing. So this is what we heard. I see absolutely no reason why I'm going to buy these nice and necessary homes when I can build an executive mansion on the lake and it's going to sell for $400,000. There's an economic incentive for me to spend this time, energy, and effort where there's a much greater return here. And so it's one of these, we're just talking simple supply and demand kind of issues that are, I think those people that are in the HRA business are trying to deal with all the time in terms of incentivizing the type of housing that we're looking for. And here in Otter Tail County, again, it's a Lakes Country issue. You definitely see this bifurcation of populations per Ben's point about us turning like Great Britain. Yes, there's some very well-heeled people that will have very strong demand to build very nice housing around a lake. And you have a poor underclass of people that work at a turkey plant that my kids go to school with. And so there's very much this, And so oftentimes in terms of leadership, we often see those that, again, we want engaged, that are oftentimes our most leadership heavy people, right? The same people building the nice place on the lake. We want them engaged, but can be a disconnect between that population in leadership and the population that is most in need. And I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new here, but that's what it looks like from my point of view in my corner of Minnesota here.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Definitely we need to have input from all sectors of the population, right? As those conversations happen and as decisions are made. John asks about, have we seen people moving in because they can work from a home with big jobs that used to be in the city? And Ben put in the chat a link to his brain gain work. But Ben, can you talk a little bit more? Are you seeing, with the popularity brought on by COVID with the work at home options many people now have, are those people moving out to rural Minnesota out of the cities, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, this is a case of welcome to the party. People realize that we've already been doing this. So we did this newcomer survey and in 2019, right before the pandemic, and we found 14% of workforce house movers were telecommuting before the pandemic. So then the pandemic hit, and of course, it's hard to welcome people in when there's nowhere for them to live. So ultimately, we did find, though, during the pandemic, I had a kind of network of real estate agents across the state, and we had some anonymous kind of polling that was done, and we had found that the pandemic did drive some of the movement of people out, but really it was threefold and split almost in three in terms of why people made the move during the pandemic. Was number one, it was the work at home kind of stuff, work from home opportunity. Number two is the George Floyd killing. And I'll point you back to the newcomer research that says safety and security is the number one reason why people move to a rural environment. Safety and security was the issue why we had people moving out. And I'll actually harken back to like maybe the 70s and say this trend of rural desire started in the 70s at a time when there was a very major anti-urban kind of sentiment. You had like Taxi Driver and Dog Day Afternoon and very anti-urban stuff in the 70s. That led to this growth. So a third people moved to work from home, a third because of the George Floyd killing, and a third of people are moving for the low interest rates, which they're at bottom levels during the pandemic. So yes, we had seen people moving in, but we had already seen people moving in that were working from home. So in many ways, our economy has been very diverse. But again, it's kind of this for me to get economic developers to see that people are going to move here and they don't need a job. And so it has been the decoupling of residents from employment, where traditionally it's the chicken or egg of economic development. And if this were 1910, the jobs are what bring people here. But we're in 2020 and it's quite different today. So I'll just end it with that. Yes, John, good question. We will be, we're actually finishing a book chapter this weekend on the newcomer research that'll be in an edited volume out in the fall. But check our website there. We're going to have more mini reports out of this new database that we've got on newcomers. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anything else that folks would like to share? What's happening in your communities, questions that you have? Go ahead and put those in the chat. We would love to see that. And while we're waiting for those comments and questions to come in, I'm going to share my screen again and do a little housekeeping work here. And if Ben and Ryan and Karen and Lori can watch the chat, that would be great. If anybody needs a certificate of participation to document this professional development experience today, we have those available. And what we need you to do is to complete a short evaluation. And Karen's going to be dropping that link into the chat. And I believe I have it set up that when you leave the webinar meeting today, that should also pop up. You should be redirected automatically if I set that up correctly. We will also include this link in our follow-up email. So in the next day or two, we'll be sending that follow-up email with a PDF of the PowerPoint, some of the links that have been shared for the brain gain and the out of reach reports and any others that were shared, as well as some flyers for those upcoming webinars, which we'll look at in a minute. Also know that 30 days after the end of the series, we're going to be sending a follow-up email. And in that is going to be another very short evaluation, but we want to know about what actions you've taken. Have you shared the information? Have you talked with people? Have you taken any action? And then we also ask, what else are you interested in learning more about? And so we hope you will provide that information for us. And then also with that follow-up email at the end of the series, we will be including the playlist of recordings for all of the webinars in the series. So I know some people were interested in that. Did we have anything in the chat yet?
Yeah, one question here about resources on how to work with city administrators about the effects of short-term rentals on the tourist industry. I honestly don't know anyone doing that. I'm going to put a link to there was kind of a Daily Yonder, which is a rural blog publication there. And I should say more than blog, they do authentic kind of journalism here. But in terms of the one article that I'd kind of hit on to kind of get my view into that realm, which isn't, again, my area of specialty, but I'm interested in this. So I don't really have a good answer for you. I don't know, but I will look is going to be my answer. Ryan, I'm not sure if you have any ideas.
Yeah, Ben, Neil Linscheid and I did a data scraping exercise about 4 or 5 years ago about, and in that instance, it was looking at, especially the tourism industry. The existing lodging industry is very interested in this topic about short-term rentals, as they saw it just as eating their lunch, although certainly some people in that lodging industry have also jumped in the fray, and you'll see them, renting rooms also on the same platforms, if you will. But, I think, good city administrator, I think it's about organizing and identifying the people that are most of interest in the city administrators, i.e. residents. B, I think it's very simple because it is so public to just collect some data about what's going on in your community. I don't think you need to get fancy. Like there are some fancy data scrapers you can but for a community, I don't think you need to do that. Just start getting some counts and saying, look at this is where this was, and this is where it is now. If this is our trend over time, hey, we see only 20 units for rent here in the winter, and boy, we're seeing 110, 200 in the summer. Come on, this is really having an impact. I'm saying, hey, be your own, citizen scientist and collect some data. I'm sorry, Ben and I are data guys, but this data is so available. It's just a matter of looking on a website and doing some counts. And I think that's a great way of bringing attention to your city administrator. And then you can sort of flesh that out in terms of like, this is why it's impacting us in this way.
Excellent conversation. Continue to put comments in the chat, and we will be sure to include Ben and Ryan's emails in the follow-up email as well. So if you're like me and you think of the question on the drive home or as you're sitting and eating lunch here in a minute, there will be opportunities to continue that conversation. As I shared at the beginning, we have the additional webinars coming up in our No Place Like Home series. Take a look at those. We also have a series on recovery and health. We welcome folks to participate in one or more of those as well. Lori and I have some Spanish speaking colleagues that are doing a variety of webinars. There are 10 on this list. And we have the English version of the title following the Spanish version as well. So please, if you're a Spanish speaker, plan to participate or share these with your participants or others that you know who might benefit. One of our super creative series during this round is a family-friendly earth care series, and today there's going to be one on introduction to virtual forest bathing. So it's using nature to help us reduce stress, but you can see some others reducing food waste, food composting. So I'm super excited. Kelly Kunkel, one of our educators out of the Mankato regional office, has given leadership in pulling this series together. We also have 3 webinars on finding balance, that's always one of my goals. And then finally, we have some looking at personal financial management, and a couple educators, Sam Roth and Sharon Powell, are doing some Thrifty Thursday webinars. Someone mentioned earlier in the conversation about all the stuff that they had to deal with when their parents moved. And we have a program for that in Extension, and it's called Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate? And that is being offered in both English and Spanish. I did put the link in the chat, and we'll include that in the follow-up email as well. There's a nice, I think it's like a 20-minute video online and a great workbook with some worksheets and things that can help families. And then some webinars for professionals there at the end. And then we also have 2 standalone webinars that I just couldn't smush into one of our existing series, looking at legislation related to transgender youth. And then another one where there'll be a great discussion about family science and health and nutrition. And Karen's going to put that final link in the chat. And so this will take you to our Extension webpage, our courses and events, and there you will find these webinars as well as other webinars and events from our colleagues in community vitality, 4-H youth development, our ag, food, natural resources folks. So we are pleased to be able to offer these. One last slide here. We invite folks to get social with us. So check out our Extension Center for Family Development on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to our family e-newsletter. And again, these will be in the PowerPoint that you receive, and we'll include that in the email as well. All right. Any final questions in the chat? Okay. Well, a big thank you to Ryan and Ben for joining us today and sharing all of your super great information. We will be in touch with all of you participants in the next day or two, but reach out to us if we can connect or collaborate on different projects. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm guessing, Karen, that you stopped the recording.